I'll stand. Please be seated.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Honour. Just before I resume, could I tender that screenshot that I took Mr. Gilmore to before? That's the one, MG4.
Was there one before that? You tendered that.
The one before that, Your Honour, was the Mr. Gilmore's notes.
Right, that was 4.
Tendered. And
This
I
is
think
5.
I think MG3 was one of Mr. Reid's screenshots.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, Mr. Gilmore, we were talking about the phenomenon of smouldering roots, and you referred to the fact that in the investigations that you'd undertaken between 1998 and 2000 in Victoria, the site of smouldering roots was often indicated by soil collapse. Have I got that right?
Yes, particularly in and around a stump. Yes.
Right, thank you. And when the soil collapses onto the tunnel that's been left by an incinerated root, what you're left with is a depression in the ground above, but then effectively a flat strip of charcoal or ash somewhere under the soil, correct?
Yes, it's true.
Now, turning your mind to the hypothesis that the TFS came up with as to how this fire had started, you were aware, weren't you, that the hypothesis was that there had been a campfire in the old stump that had led to a smouldering burn through at least one of its roots, and that smouldering burn had travelled over the course of about 6 days to somewhere in the ground around the tree stump where the root had emerged into the air, at which time the smouldering burn was able to become a free burn and it ignited some kind of dry fuel on the ground around it, correct?
Yes.
Now, you would agree with me that in that hypothesis, if a given root had been burning from the stump outward, then the parts of the root nearest the stump had been burning for the longest.
Yes.
And so the parts of the root nearest the stump were the parts that were most likely to have been incinerated into nothing more than charcoal powder.
Charcoal is what I saw in the photos of the excavation.
Okay, so can I distinguish between lumps of charcoal and ash or charcoal powder? The parts of the root that had been burning for the longest were the most likely to have completely incinerated to the point where there was nothing left but powder.
The formation of charcoal underground is sometimes doesn't completely incinerate, if you like, to the wood fibre. So buried wood will quite often form into a charcoal, and in the formation of charcoal, making of charcoal, you actually start the wood and cover it in dirt, and the lack of oxygen stops the burning process.
Yes, but as a root underground itself is subject to a smouldering burn, the effect of the burning reduces the mass of the root, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
And as the mass of the root reduces, there's the opportunity for at least some oxygen to creep into the space where the root had been.
It could be possible, yes.
And so, again, it's perfectly feasible that a given section of the root, having been exposed to a smouldering burn for possibly up to 6 days, could have reduced entirely to powder.
It's possible, yes.
Would you say it's probable?
Oh, I don't know that I can say that with any surety, I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, at the time that you undertook your excavation, you were aware that the TFS fire investigators had excavated an area around the tree stump, weren't you?
An area, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you'd seen the photographs, I think you alluded to them a moment ago, that the TFS investigators had identified at least a couple of small lumps of charcoal over the extent of the area where they had followed what they described as the burning route, or the burned route.
Yes.
Right. Now, His Honour's heard evidence, Mr. Gilmore, from both of the TFS investigators that in order to follow the charcoal line that had been left by the burned route, the process of excavating to follow the line itself disturbed the soil so much that they were effectively destroying the evidence of the path of the route as they went. Do you understand the summary I've just given to you?
Yes, I understand the summary, yes.
And that's the kind of problem that you would expect with trying to excavate something like the route that the TFS had described, that in order to see the evidence, you effectively have to destroy the evidence.
It's quite often the case, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Now, after you had done that excavation work, you and Mr. Crowe prepared the 2019 report, correct?
Yes. Just checking the date. Yes, March 19. Yeah.
And then at some time in 2020, you were asked to develop that report into a full report for the purposes of being used in potential court proceedings.
Yes.
Correct. Right. Now, can I ask you, Mr. Gilmore, the first day that you attended White Hills Road with Mr. Thomas and Mr. Knight, in total, how many hours do you think you spent with those two gentlemen?
Oh, I don't know. We got to Hobart at about 2 o'clock, I believe. We picked up from there. I can't remember if Mr. Thomas was in the car or met us there, or I'm sorry, I can't remember how that worked.
In any event, it was at least 3 to 4 hours on the first day.
It's a
correct?
considerable amount of time. Right. So.
And then on the second day, the 20th, when you did the excavation, did you have any communications with Mr. Knight or Mr. Thomas on that day?
Yes, after we returned. So we had a flight to catch at,
Right.
I think, 5 o'clock, and we met just before the flight, close to the airport.
Okay. And then, jumping forward in time, we've seen from your notes that you had another meeting with the defendant's lawyers in December 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, you prepared your third report, the one dealing with steam, and most recently, your May report dealing with some of the evidence that's been given earlier in this trial, yes?
Yes.
Now, can I ask you, Mr. Gilmore, at any time during your investigations that led to the 2019 report or the 2020 report or any of your subsequent reports, did anyone tell you that the old stump had been dug out in September 2014?
If that's the time of Mr. Thomas's excavation, I was aware of that.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, can
I think from memory we got, and I checked those dates, Mr. Armstrong, too. It was the 19th and the 20th. We were here originally. The afternoon of the 20th, I believe, is when we received a good deal of information, like discs with info and videos and photos,
Okay.
and I believe hard copies also of Mr. Thomas's excavation photos.
All right. Thank you. Now, can I tell you, Mr. Gilmore, and this is not controversial, that Mr. Thomas undertook his excavation work on the 30th of March 2014, and then on the 5th of April 2014.
Right.
Okay, so his excavation work, of which you've seen the photographs, was done in March and April 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So with that additional context, can I ask you again, at any time in the course of your investigations, for the purposes of preparing your reports for this fire, did anybody tell you to the effect that a contractor had gone out to 242 White Hills Road in September 2014 with some kind of heavy machinery and had dug up the old stump?
No.
Right. You would regard that as pretty relevant, I take it?
Yes.
That would have been roughly 4 years before you attended the site.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had been told that somebody had gone out there and had dug up the old stump and had then been instructed to, and had then cut it up, that would certainly affect your assessment of the integrity of this site that you were being asked to look at, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Right. Now, when you attended the site in November 2018, can we go back please to document 201? And can we go to photographs 32 and 33? And you would agree with me, I take it, Mr. Gilmore, that so far as one can see any bits of dead wood at all in those photographs, it looks quite profoundly different from the site of the spiky stump and the old stump that was recorded in the TFS photographs, doesn't it?
Well, those two stumps aren't visible above ground. Yes.
No. Did you make any inquiries as to what had happened that led to the site looking so different from what it had been at the time of the TFS investigation?
No.
Right. Well, perhaps if Mr. Temponi could bring up document 24. And could we go to page 0052? And the bottom photograph. So there we see Mr. Gilmore really quite an obvious large blackened stump on the right and then the rhinoceros or spiky stump on the left.
Yes.
Did it not cross your mind as relevant to inquire what had happened that led to those visible features no longer being present when you were at the site?
No. No.
Would you agree with me, Mr. Gilmore, that the section of stump with the marker 7 on it looks from the photograph to be a pretty substantial piece of wood?
Yes.
It would take an awful lot of, frankly, violence to break up that piece of wood, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And you would expect that the kind of forces that would be involved in trying to break up that piece of wood would cause a lot of vibration to the ground around the stump, wouldn't it?
Could well do.
Right. Mm. And likewise, the spiky stump looks like a pretty solid piece of wood, doesn't it?
Certainly not in the same category. So
No.
imagining trying to remove one or the other, one would be much easier, I would think.
The old stump, digging up the old stump and cutting up the old stump would be a pretty substantial exercise, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Did it cross your mind when you were out there, Mr. Gilmore, as to, what's happened to this site? Why can't I see any of the things that are shown in the TFS photograph?
The intention of our excavation was the connection between the actual rhinoceros horn stump and the cone 13 was the main intention. So the series of photos, we actually have some excellent photos that were taken. A series of photos show that the direction of travel of the route that's in the wall of the excavation at about cone 13 heads somewhere around about halfway along the handle of the white shovel there in direction. And so if the last of those excavation photos that were taken, I think by Mr. Needham, but anyway, quite good photos, show charcoal disappearing under a rock in the direction of that white shovel. So,
or perhaps
I was concentrating on the rhinoceros horn stump, if you like.
right. So you were effectively trying to dig the line from marker 13 to the spiky stump, correct?
Yes.
And you were not trying to dig the line from marker 13 toward the old stump.
No.
Right. Now, you referred to the excellent photos taken by Constable Needham. Could we just go down, please, Mr. Temponi? No, sorry, back in the document 24. Can we just go down, please, to photograph 30? And then scroll down to 31 and 32. Are those the photos you're referring to, Mr. Gilmore?
Yes.
All right, and just to complete that exercise, also can we see photographs 33 and 34? Now, Mr. Gilmore, at the time that you attended the site to undertake your excavation in November 2018, you were aware, weren't you, that you were likely to be looking for a line of charcoal powder in the soil that traced the course that had previously been followed by a route that was supposed to have been the subject of a smouldering burn over the course of a number of days, correct?
What I was really interested in was from the crown of the stump down into the ground, how far the burning had extended down. That's what my excavation was for.
And when you say the crown of the stump, you mean the spiky stump?
Yes, the spiky stump.
Right.
Yes.
So you didn't try and do that excavation at all from the old stump?
No, Mr. Crow actually excavated around the old stump. I did the spiky stump.
Right.
And Mr. Crow was using the mattock and I was using hands mostly around it.
Okay. Well, can you tell me, you don't deal with sorry, tell me if I'm right here, Mr. Gilmore, you don't deal with Mr. Crow's excavation work in any of your reports, do you?
The initial report is a joint report by both of us.
All right.
So the which was written in that format. So I think in the preamble it says something like, we wrote this report.
Okay.
So I had some meetings
and I take it from what you've just said that Mr. Crow was responsible for making any assessments of what might have happened around the old stump.
well, that would have been joint and the photos were mine.
All right. And the photos that you refer to are the ones that we've seen so far this morning?
Yes, yeah.
And those photos show the extent of the excavation that was done in the area where the old stump once had been.
Yes, yeah. There's no excavations we did that haven't been shown in photos.
All right. And so, given what I've said to you, Mr. Gilmore, about the old stump having been dug out in 2014, what Mr. Crow was excavating was at best the site where you thought the old stump once had been, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're comfortable with the site that we had aligned at,
Right.
and we're in the right place. And it actually explains Mr. Crow's excavations had two routes separated, as we said earlier, by 2 metres, and that 2 metres is now crystallising for me about what that area without wood in it would have been.
Well, not just dug out, Mr. Armstrong, but filled in.
Dug out and filled in, Your Honour, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So can I just understand what your last answer, Mr. Gilmore? You're saying that Mr. Crow, as you understood it, found a piece of route somewhere near where you thought the stump had once been, and what? You found another piece of route 2 metres away?
Yeah, I think we covered earlier, there was 2 excavations
Yes.
at the site of the old stump.
Right.
One showed route in one location, another one in another location, both of those leading into the ground.
So in 2 holes, you found 2 routes that may or may not once have been connected.
Well, we were comfortable they were, yes, but they were from the old stump. The route pattern, sort of like an extended ice cream cone, if you like, was pointing to that area. So, and I was quite comfortable lining up using forestry techniques, I suppose, with the background to ensure we're in the right place when we were excavating.
Okay, so at the location near where you think the old stump once had been, you found a route that you've just described as having a conical shape, correct?
Yes.
Right. And that route, I take it, is one that you were able to identify by the process of excavation that we've agreed was just literally scraping the surface soil away from whatever was once there.
Yes.
Okay. And His Honour's heard evidence, and in fact His Honour just referred to it, that when the old stump was dug up, topsoil was shipped in, trucked into the area and dumped onto the site to flatten it all out. Do you recall noticing whether the soil that you had to scrape away to expose the conical shaped route was different type of soil to the stuff that you were finding elsewhere on the block?
I would have classed it as topsoil rather than the clay undersoil that we talked about earlier at depth.
And so, to be clear, in the area where you thought the old stump once had been, well, let me ask you this, Mr. Gilmore. When you dug that area and found that conical route, did you wonder then what happened to the rest of the wooden structure that we saw in the photograph I showed you a moment ago?
No, because my concentration was on the other stump.
Right, okay. And you didn't discuss with Mr. Crowe, nobody said, where's the stump gone?
No, we were looking for burning down into the ground from roots.
Okay, so you scraped away some topsoil, you found a conical root, and then 2 metres away you dug a hole, correct?
No, I dug...
Sorry, I'll withdraw the question.
Okay.
Mr. Crowe scraped away some topsoil.
Yes.
And found the conical root, and then about 2 metres away from that location you dug a hole.
Just chronologically the other way around. So
okay. Right.
I dug the spiky stump.
Yep.
And the excavation further to the north from that. Mr. Crowe dug the other 2 at the area of the old stump.
Okay, now, I'm sorry, Mr. Gilmore, you've now said the other 2. That would suggest that there were 4 holes.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, let's go back and do this the slow way then. Can we please go back to photographs 58 and 59 of your report, Mr. Gilmore? I asked you to identify the various holes that have been dug.
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, what we've identified in these 2 photographs is a sum total of 3 different holes.
Yes.
The red lines indicate hole number 1.
Yep.
The green line on the top photograph corresponds with the top green line on the bottom photograph. That's hole number 2, yes?
Yes.
Hole number 3 is the one indicated in the bottom left-hand side of the bottom photograph, yes?
Yes.
Where's the 4th hole?
If you go up to the top of either photo, where the red circle is, to the left of those, which...
So the top photograph to the left of the red circle?
Yes, up in the top left-hand corner there is in that area there, and I think we covered it in an earlier discussion.
Okay, all right. So that's a hole looking for what?
So at the cone 20 location.
Can we go up, please, Mr. I'm sorry. Just wait for his honour.
That's the dog's grave, isn't it?
That's what I thought, Your Honour.
No, sorry, I thought we covered earlier. The initial excavation was of the spiky stump, and an area further to the north, there were 2 holes that we were looking at in one of the photos.
Well, can I just
So if we scroll up, we might find that photo.
Can we go up, please? Sorry, can we go back to document 15, I think it is in the court book. So, photograph 58 there, Mr. Gilmore, we've got the white rock up on the top left-hand corner, and then immediately up from that rock there's a dark set of pixels.
If we scroll
you say
up,
that's another hole, is it?
if we scroll up, we'll probably see a much better photo of it.
56.
So it's starting to appear there. If we go further, Mr. Tempani, thank you. Yeah, so this is the one we discussed earlier. Oh yeah, we were talking about the tools rather than the holes.
Okay, can we go to 53, please, Mr. Tempani?
So there's a hole there in the foreground,
Right.
which is looking for any extension from the crown of the spiky stump back towards cone 20. And in the background is the excavation adjacent to the tree that we see in the other photos.
All right.
So there are 2 photos there dug by myself, one at the crown of the root, the other one in the area of cone 20, and then to the right of that photo 53 is the 2 excavations by Mr. Crowe.
Okay. So I take it, Mr. Gilmore, that what we see in photograph 53 is very hard to make out whole at the base of the trunk of the new tree, and then an area maybe a metre wide that's not been dug, followed by a second hole. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's in the area where I take it that the only identifying features that you were able to locate that corresponded with anything that you thought you might have seen in the TFS photographs was a stump that you thought might be the remnants of the spiky stump, and then also the conical root that you thought might be the remnants of the bole, B-O-L-E, of the old stump. Is that right?
I was satisfied that the excavation back near
Which excavation, Mr. Gilmore?
the one back near the sapling,
Okay, so the top one that we see in photograph 53.
yes, was the site of the spiky stump.
Right.
And if we scroll down a couple of photos, you'll see the shape of various roots heading out from that bowl. And what I was doing, B-O-W-L, was scraping out with my hands until I found wood and stopped finding charcoal in that part. So there are, both of those photos show fairly well. So there are, again, the ice cream shaped roots heading out in various directions in that photo from the centre.
Now, just to be clear, the ice cream shaped roots that we're talking about in this photograph are the ones that you associate with the spiky stump, not the old stump, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And what we see in these photographs is some blackened wood
Yes.
inside a sleeve of wood that is still brown, correct? Or at least perhaps discoloured by soil being stuck to it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so, and this is the portion of that old root that is furthest underground, isn't it?
In the last of those excavation photos, it will be yes.
Yeah, so we're actually looking into the hole that you've dug. The black wood that we can see is the underground portion of that wooden structure, and it's rising up towards the ground line. Sorry, as we look at photograph 54, are we looking at the side of that root that was nearest the tree to which it was attached, or is the black stuff on the side of the root that was running away from the tree to which it was attached?
So what we were looking at was how far the charcoal extended down the various roots. And so from where the ruler is, there is a small root, a large root, a small root, and you can see the blackened ends of those where they had burnt. And then in the bottom left, there is a root there, and in the right under the ruler, there is one heading off in the other direction, so radiating out from the centre of the tree.
So in these photographs, was the tree to which these roots were attached between the photographer and the blackened part of the large root that we see?
Yes, the original tree.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're looking down where the bowl used to be. Yes.
Right. Okay, so you dug that hole next to the new tree trunk. You were excavating what you thought was the spiky stump.
Yes.
And then about a metre away, you then dug a second hole, again investigating the possibility of a burning root associated with the spiky stump, correct?
Yes.
And then separately from the excavations that you did, Mr. Crow scraped some dirt away, some topsoil away from the location where you thought the old stump once had been.
Yes.
And about 2 metres away from that location, was it you or Mr. Crow that then dug another shallow excavation?
He dug those two.
Right.
Yes. And
Okay.
I did the photography.
All right. And the excavation that Mr. Crow did furthest away from the site where you thought the old stump once had been was again only about 100 millimetres deep, correct?
Yeah, I didn't measure that one, but yes,
Right.
that would be fair enough.
Okay. Now, back to where we started before we got off onto that little digression to clarify how many holes had been dug. The part of this exercise that you handled was the process of trying to work out whether there had been a smouldering burn from the spiky stump along its root system, and if so, how far, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And as a result of your investigation, you concluded that the root system that you thought was associated with the spiky stump did not appear to have been subject to a smouldering burn underground in any meaningful way.
Yeah, my estimate is perhaps 100, 150 mils of burnt material on the tops of those roots.
And then in relation to the old stump, that was what Mr. Crow was looking after?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, at the time that you and he were undertaking your work on the 20th of November, did you refer from time to time back to the TFS photographs?
Yes.
Right. And you would have observed, I take it, that the TFS photographs in relation to the excavation of what they concluded was a route leading to the old stump had gone down about 500 millimetres.
I've read that since, but I didn't think it was quite that deep at the time.
Okay. All right, and it's your understanding, isn't it, Mr. Gilmore, that the root plate extending from a mature old tree like the old stump once had been is going to be a root plate in which the roots will be sent out in a spiderweb kind of fashion at varying different depths in the soil.
Yes.
And there's likely to be hundreds, if not thousands, of such roots.
Yeah, there'll be main root structures and then other things coming off that.
Yep. And it would not surprise you at all, I take it, Mr. Gilmore, if there had been a smouldering burn in one or some of those thousands of roots, but not others.
Well, from the work I've done, I would be surprised because we were looking for how far the burn went down in the ground. And in, so
Well, that's actually not right, is it, Mr. Gilmore? You weren't looking for how far the burn went down in the ground. Mr. Crowe was doing the work in relation to the old stuff.
oh, at the other side, yes.
Right.
Mm.
And he wasn't looking for how far it went down. All he'd done was scrape away the topsoil.
Well, he was looking for signs of burning.
Right.
So,
Well, he was looking for signs of burning in the top 100 millimetres of topsoil.
yes.
Right. Now, Mr. Gilmore, when you went out to do this work in November 2018, were you concerned at all about how reliable the process of excavation might be, given that it was happening some 5 years and 11 months after the fire?
Well, we were armed with some pretty good photos to line up the locations, was the first thing. And then I was looking for evidence that would reinforce that burning had happened, and couldn't find that.
Okay. Could Mr. Temponi please bring up document 155? And can we go right to the end of that document and then scroll back up, please? Up, please. There's a couple of photographs. Up a bit further. A bit more. Stop. No, the previous one. That's it. Now, Mr. Gilmore, this is a photograph that was produced to us as something that was taken of the area where the old stump had once been, after it had been dug up and apparently cut up, and then the area backfilled with a couple of cubic metres of topsoil. Now, when you compare that, Mr. Gilmore, with your recollection of the area shown in the TFS photographs, you would agree with me that there is really no identifying features left, are there?
Not above ground, no.
No. Okay.
Apart from the reed on the left and the young tree just starting to grow.
Where's the young tree?
On the edge of the topsoil.
So that little green thing that
Yeah, that sapling just starting there, and the reed, which is one of the two reeds that grow in that area.
All right. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Gilmore, now that you are aware that the old stump had been dug up, presumably with fairly heavy machinery, and the area had been backfilled, and there's likely to have been an awful lot of vibration over that site, isn't there?
Yes, possible.
Yep.
Yep.
And any tunnels that might have been left around locations where roots had been incinerated were very likely to have been collapsed.
With the same qualification as before. If it was charcoal, it would remain. If it was ash, you would lose perhaps half, I imagine, as that compressed.
Well, if it was fully incinerated to ash, Mr. Gilmore, what you would have been left with is a tunnel lined with ash, and if the tunnel collapsed, then that ash simply becomes a two-dimensional strip through the ground, doesn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. And you've pointed, His Honour, to the sapling. It might be a sapling, it might be a weed. In any event, by the time you got there, some 4 and a bit years later, that sapling, or a sapling, had grown into a, reasonably tall young tree, hadn't it?
Yes.
And it would have been putting out roots all around it to form a new root plate.
Yes.
And you were aware that somebody had dug a grave for a dog,
Yes.
pretty much right on the spot that you were interested in excavating, correct?
Yes.
Now, in all those circumstances, Mr. Gilmore, where the stump, can I list these propositions for you? Number one, it was more than 5 years after the TFS had been there, correct?
Yes.
Number two, the TFS had excavated the site.
No.
All right.
They'd excavated near Cone 20.
Okay. So I thought that your excavation was also trying to start from cone 20.
I did the stump for the spiky stump, first, and then the other excavation.
Right, but you referred before to trying to excavate the area around cone 20.
Yes,
And that was the area that the TFS had excavated.
yes, with trying to be in between that bit.
Okay.
So as we discussed, probably about a metre from the spiky stump, and in gold mining terms, a costine, so a trench, a crossways.
Okay, so you were trying not to excavate the area that the TFS had actually excavated. Is that right?
I didn't see any point in that, sir.
Okay. You're now aware that by the time you got there, it was more than 4 years since the stump had been dug up.
The old stump, yes.
The old stump had been
Yes.
dug up. You're now aware that truckloads of soil had been dumped onto the site.
Well, 2 metres, is that what you said?
2 cubic metres, I believe.
Yep.
And you're now aware that a new tree had grown up over the same area,
Yes.
spreading its roots.
Yep.
And you're now aware that somebody had dug a grave for a dog in the area.
I think my understanding was the grave for the dog was in the hole of the old stump. I think that's
Right.
my understanding of what that area was.
Okay, so that area around where you think the old stump might once have been has not only been ripped up, but has then been dug up another time to serve as the grave for a dog. That was your understanding?
Yes.
All right. And you've, since the time of your excavation, become aware that Mr. Thomas had dug through that entire area, including the area that you had dug around the spiky stump, correct?
The area he dug, I think, was from about the centres of the stump back towards cone 20 on both stumps, I think.
Okay, well, let's go to Mr. Thomas's report. Mr. Gilmore, I don't want to be unfair to you, so could we go, please, to document 19 and photograph 13 on Corp Book page 0402. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Gilmore, that if one of those burned objects on the left of this excavated area happens to be what you thought was the remains of the spiky stump that you excavated, then Mr. Thomas has done a very thorough disturbance of the soil that you subsequently then dug into?
Yes, probably half of it, yeah.
Right, well, which part of Mr. Thomas's excavation do you say was not the same as your excavation around the spiky stump, what you think might have been the spiky stump?
Oh, yes. So it appears like he's dug to ground level. It's actually a bit blurry on this. So, yeah, it's more visible up there. So the ice cream cone-shaped roots that you see there, and the excavation, it appears like he's dug back to about what I would think would be the centre of that bowl we were talking about earlier. So it doesn't show the burning underneath from where we dug to. So the top
please,
part of our excavation.
Can I just
to
stop
answer
you,
your
Mr.
question.
Gilmore, because I'm having trouble following what you're talking about.
Okay.
Can Mr. Temponi please take a screenshot? And I'd like you to indicate, please, Mr. Gilmore, which areas you dug that are not shown in this photograph to have been excavated by Mr. Thomas.
Oh yeah, would be the depth underneath. So if we go down, Mr. Temponi, so if you go across to the left to the end of that burning on there, and go under that, see where that green, whatever it is, weed prickle or something is growing. So if you drew a circle from there down to the right, diagonally down, and then across, sorry, no, I've got you to come across too early. what I want you to do is head to the other large route on the right-hand side there, just straight across. Yep.
So down towards the bottom right-hand corner?
Yeah, that would be fine. And then keep going down from there. Yep, stop there. And then draw a triangle to the left in shape. So yes, exactly right, yeah. So stopping about halfway along that line you've just traversed. So back, yeah, so like a triangle there. And what I'm trying to indicate there is depth. So that excavation hasn't gone down to the bottom of the bowl underneath the tree where it was burnt.
Well, so do we join the two? Do we form that triangle?
Yes, join that, sorry, yes.
Now, you say that you're trying to represent depth.
Yes.
You've given evidence a couple of times that you went down about 250 mil.
Yes. Yep.
And are you indicating by that triangle that you went down about 250 millimetres directly below the top of, sorry, the upper of those two burned stumps?
No, my.
In fact,
oh yes,
can I just pause you, Mr. Gilmore, yeah. Mr. Temponi, the top stump that's been burned. Can you put up and to the left of that letter A? And the bottom of the two stumps that's been burned, down and to the right of it, can you put it letter B? Now, Mr. Gilmore, are you trying to indicate by this annotation that you dug about 250 metres straight down from the burned end of stump A?
No, just where my triangle is drawn there, slightly deeper than this photo. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, Mr. Thomas has given evidence that he dug down to about 300 mil. And your evidence is that you dug down to 250. So you would agree with me again, wouldn't you, Mr. Gilmore? It's terribly difficult to get a sense of depth perception from a two-dimensional photograph.
It is difficult, yes.
Now, all we've got to go on then is the recollection of the diggers. You said you went down 250 mil. Mr. Thomas said he went down 300 mil. Therefore, Mr. Thomas went down deeper than you did, correct?
No, because the site's been disturbed. So the site isn't the same.
I think we can agree about that. So do you mean, Mr. Gilmore, that because of the site disturbance that you've now become aware of, that is, among other things, the topsoil being dumped over this area, that the surface from which you were starting was higher up than this one?
No, I couldn't say.
Okay. Well, I'm still trying to understand. I'm just trying to be fair to you, Mr. Gilmore. Why do you say that you went deeper than Mr. Thomas when Mr. Thomas says he went to 300 mil and you went to 250 mil?
Well, again, because that level of starting is not the same, so I'm not sure what his level of start was compared to mine, so a datum if you like. But I would expect in that triangle to see that burnt wood in the base of that stump crown if he was at the same level that we were at.
All right, well, can we go back?
Sorry.
Can you, Mr. Temponi, leave that photograph, which I'll tender you on it, on the left-hand side, and can we go back to Mr. Gilmore's report? Sorry, Mr. Gilmore's photographs at 201, document 201. And just perhaps, can we scroll up so that we can see photograph 54? Can you enlarge it just so that we see photograph 54? That'll do. So if they're the same thing, Mr. Gilmore, would you agree with me that it looks like by the time you get to the site, the piece of burned wood that's standing, who knows, maybe 300, maybe 200 mil above the ground, that is piece item A, in 2014, item A was sitting well proud of the ground, that by the time you got there in late 2018, it was some centimetres under the surface.
I think comparing the two, it looks like the centre of my photo is B,
Okay.
and that item A doesn't appear in that photo.
All right. So what you think was the spiky stump, in fact, was B, is it?
No, I'm saying that A and B are roots from the spiky stump,
Okay.
and that my photo on the right-hand side appears to show the end of B, and that smaller root that sits across it in between A and B in the left-hand photo, and that the A part of the root system isn't showing in that photo. That's what I think it shows.
Right. So I'm just trying to work out what you're saying here, Mr. Gilmore. So what we see in the photograph on the right-hand side
Yes.
is object B from a different angle,
Yes.
and what we see in the photograph on the right-hand side is a thin root with what might be a charcoal end to the left of the major root.
Yes.
Perhaps, Mr. Temponi, could you, that's it, can you just circle that in green, please? Actually, Mr. Temponi, can you take a screenshot of this whole screen? Great, now the whole thing. Now to be clear, Mr. Gilmore, so firstly, Mr. Temponi, could you circle the small root that I just mentioned? Alright, thank you. Can you mark that 1? Now can you circle the blackened face of the main root? Mark that 2. And now Mr. Gilmore, up and to the right of 2, there's a piece of brown emerging from the soil. Is that do you take that to be another root?
Yes, that is another root. Yes.
Can we circle that one and mark it 3, please, Mr. Temponi? Now, when we look at that configuration, Mr. Gilmore, accepting that it's now effectively looking down the throat of item B on the left-hand side, you would agree with me surely that there is nothing around item B that resembles items 1 and 3 on the right-hand side, is there?
Yeah, there is about halfway along the triangle, there is the skinnier root.
Sorry, are you talking
so if
about...
we go up to up halfway along that, no, the other line, Mr. Temponi, thank you. Yeah, that
there?
To the right there. Yeah, there's
Right.
a small root there.
Well, firstly,
Mr. Gilmore, are you any better at doing this than I am?
sorry, Your Honour, I'll move on.
The way I'm looking at those two photographs,
Yes.
item 1 is lying across item 2.
Yes.
It's not in the photograph on the left-hand side.
Right. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, honestly, it's a genuine question. Are you any better at doing this than I am? Isn't it a matter of looking at the photographs and forming a view about it, and your view is as good as mine?
Trying to line it up. Yes, sir. Yes.
Please, Your Honour.
And the next photo down in the series shows the next part of excavation where I was trying to describe what I thought was my depth, as opposed to the depth shown. Pardon me. So
Yes, could we look at that, please?
the next one down shows charcoal underneath the end of B. So yeah, and that what's referred to as completed excavation. So there is charcoal in the centre, the end of B there. There is what appears to be a root in the left-hand side there, and that was scraped out with my hands to find charcoal there. And so what I was attempting to establish was, had charcoal burning gone to the top left of that photo.
Now, Mr. Gilmore, I do need to put this to you. When one compares the structures that we circled in green on the photograph a moment ago with what we see around items A and B on the left-hand side photograph, there's nothing that resembles those three items sitting in that configuration in the photograph on the left-hand side, is there?
Yeah, after having looked at the previous photo, down below the shape 1 is the unburnt root section that's more visible in the next photo.
So if Mr. Temponi, just on this photograph so that we don't confuse things too much, could you draw another circle from the bottom of 1, please, Mr. Temponi, and down to the bottom of what looks like a brown strip? That's it?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
And can we mark that 4? I need to put it to you again, Mr. Gilmore. Even with that correction, there's nothing on the left-hand side photograph that resembles anything that we see in the right-hand photograph, is there?
Well, I think 2 and B are quite the same to me.
I'd be happy to accept that.
But at 3, 1 and 4, item B, to align with the right-hand photograph, would have a root of some couple of centimetres of diameter sitting between item B and the photographer, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And we don't see it there anywhere, do we?
No.
Okay. Now, you were explaining to me, Mr. Gilmore, that sorry, I just need to clarify this. Is item B in the left-hand photograph, sorry, you did say items A and B you think are both associated with the spiky stump?
Yes, by the shape of the root in that ice cream fashion coming out.
Okay. Now, can I move on next to the question of the area of origin? In your 2019 report, Mr. Gilmore, you identified 2 potential areas of origin, one of them being the area between the big log and the septic line, and the other being the area around the old stump. Is that correct?
I think the report has one area of origin mapped as an attachment, which includes both those areas.
All right. Thank you, you're quite right. You said that there's one area of origin and it's larger than the one identified by the TFS, but as a result it includes the area between the big log and the septic line.
Okay.
Now, before we get into that issue, Mr. Gilmore, is it still your view that the area between the big log and the septic line is a potential area of origin for this fire?
Yes.
All right. Now, Mr. Gilmore, His Honour's heard evidence from one of the early firefighters to attend on the day on the 3rd of January to the effect that the area around the big stump had not burned by the time the firefighter got there. Would that affect your assessment as to whether the area, what we'll call the septic area, had been an area of origin or an area of later burning?
I assume, so you meant the big log?
The area between the big log and the septic line.
I think you said big stump.
I object to that, Your Honour. The evidence should be put accurately to the witness.
I recall exactly what the evidence was. And the answer that Mr. Butler gave was, no, I don't believe so, because if it had been, I would have put water on it.
Yeah, but it's the question, Your Honour, that he was referring to the ground on either side of the big log, not between the big log and the septic.
Oh, I see, yes.
Okay.
He was asked a number of
It's
questions
that part
around
of it,
that. We can go to the transcript.
Yeah.
Certainly. Now, perhaps it would be convenient, Your Honour, if we bring up the transcript and I can ask Mr. Gilmore to read it.
Yes.
Could Mr. Temponi please first bring up page 154 of the transcript? Scroll back so that we can see the top half of that page, please, Mr. Temponi. Thank you. Now, could you read
Thank you.
that page down to line 25, please? Sorry, line 28, please, Mr. Gilmore.
Okay.
Please let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, that would be consistent with what I know of the site. That statement. Yeah.
The question was, would that knowledge of that affect your assessment?
Oh yes. No, because the area each side of the log was unburnt. It didn't burn during the fire.
All right. So
the fire scar started perhaps 2 or 3 metres from the big log, something like that.
Are you suggesting, are you reading this, Mr. Gilmore, as a reference to within a metre or 2 of either side of the big log, eh?
Yes, so that's...
Okay,
that's
all right. Well, Mr. Temponi, could we please next go to Mr. Robinson's evidence at transcript page 636. The transcript of Just give me 1 moment. Transcript of the 11th of May, Mr. Tempone. On page 636. And can we go down and can you read that large paragraph to yourself, please, Mr. Gilmore?
Starting at 6, sir?
At line 6.
Yep. Yep.
And could Mr. Tempone please also bring up Court Book document 192? What happened after that exchange with Mr. Robinson, Mr. Gilmore, was that he drew a map,
Oh, yes.
and this is the map that he indicated was broadly accurate indication of where the fire moved to his observation.
No, I object. It was his impression, not observation.
I'll correct the question. That's Mr. Robinson's map recording his impression of where the fire went.
Okay. So the 2 yellow arrows, I'm assuming, are representing fire moving in a wall backwards against the wind, would be my impression of what he's got
Yes.
drawn there.
Yes?
Yeah, so the indicators at the site are almost consistent with that. So the right-hand upper side of the red box, the fire is moving to the right. So the right-hand side of that box, Mr. Tempone. So the fire is moving to the right in that fuel, just above that where the corner of the box is. Where the corner of the red box is, yeah. So there, the fire is moving to the right-hand side. The indicators show from somewhere around about the middle of the box to the left-hand arrow just outside the box. So if we go up and slightly to the left, Mr. Tempone, directions of fire travel there go up and follow that path the cursor just took. And so in a fashion, what he's drawn there, yes, is representative of that fire did move down to the east from perhaps the top left-hand side of the red box there, might be a useful way to represent that. And eventually fire backed around to the right-hand side, and there's a large black tree at the end of the septic lines, which I think is a bit of a landmark that people have used. So it's black and has the type of surface on it that burnt easily. And then the area of the septic lines is unburnt totally and remained unburnt. So the box isn't a bad representation almost of where the fire ended up. So you can see the log there, and the areas both sides of the log were unburnt.
All right. Now, next, Mr. Gilmore, could Mr. Tempone please take us to the transcript of the 6th of May, Ms. Barrett's cross-examination? Page 466. And go down to the bottom of the page. In fact, perhaps can we go back to, I'll show you the whole of that page, Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you. you, sir.
Now, you see there, Mr. Gilmore, that she also says that the fire never burned her septic. Bottom of the page.
Yes, yeah.
And refers to fire only having speckled through the area around the big log.
It says a few things. It says she's not sure, I think. And then it talks about the speckling. I'm not quite sure, but I imagine that means fires visible in different parts, but not roaring, would be what I would take from that, I would think. Fire in the gum trees, which would gel with that sort of windscreen wiper idea of backing fire heading towards that big black tree. Yeah, and that's the area of the septic. Up near the house is a septic tank, and then there's two septic lines, and one of the septic lines on the northeast corner had a vent which melted during the event of the fire, and I think there's been some discussion about trying to save that plastic hardware that was above ground at times.
Mr. Armstrong, just while you're on the transcript, the passage that I had in mind was at page 157, line 32.
Thank you, Your Honour.
And there's another in Mr. Reid's cross-examination of Mr. Butler.
Oh, thank you, Your Honour, yes. So perhaps if Mr. Temponi could go back to that.
157, about line 30.
Yeah, so that's that same reference to unburnt area.
Now, Mr. Gilmore, having seen that aspect of those accounts from people who were there when the fire was still burning, Ms. Barrett, Mr. Robinson, and then later on in the day, Mr. Butler, would you agree with me that the most likely explanation that makes sense of all of their evidence is that the fire started around the area of the tree stump, initially burned towards the southeast, but also then slowly backed into the area around the big log?
The problem with that theory is the direction the fire was travelling on the ground. So the fire has travelled from probably the bulldozed heap with the logs in it is a good reference at the end of the big log. So people may have been there and seen that. Yep. Basically, it's between the old stump and the septic lines. So fire there moved to the east and then crossed over the track and then moved towards cone 20 are some of the indicators that are showing fire travel there, and then fire back towards that septic line that got melted.
All right, I see the time, Your Honour.
Yes, thank you. Well adjourned till 2:15.
All stand, please. This honourable court now stands adjourned until 2:15 p.m.